What's up guys, it's Idzi here, welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at the top decks now that the national season is over. I feel like moving into the WCQ season, it's time to see exactly which decks managed to perform the best during nationals and which decks we can expect to see the most, especially for the European and the American WCQ that will be in about a month from now. So now let's take a look at the top meta decks of the July 22 format coming forward. So number 10, Adignister. So Adignister is one of those decks that does have a very cheesy win condition. Being able to make an unaffected monster means that some decks, especially some of the top decks in this list, do not have an out because an unaffected monster, especially with such high attack points, if it cannot be outed by access code, then there is no out to it. And since people do not play Boral Sword anymore, the Arrival is even more invulnerable to anything because the thing is, while access code is a much better card than Boral Sword had the out to basically any monster that had 6,000 attack or less. And the Arrival, the max attack it can get is 6,000, so this is why without Boral Sword in the meta, the Arrival Cybers is a monster that can outright win you games on its own, and that's basically enough to give Adignister, with all its one-card combos and things, the number 10 slot on the list. Number 9, Sky Striker. Now, Sky Strikers, even though they did win a YCS, it's mainly due to the Mystic Mine strategy, and Mystic Mine is a thing that basically works at the beginning of every format because people just forget it exists, they are not prepared for it, and then they lose to it. So we see it in side decks, and this time we saw it even in the main decks a lot of the time. But the thing is, once it does well in one event, then people just expect to see it more, and then they main deck outs to it, and that's why the rest of the Sky Striker decks after YCS Hartford, they did not do anything just because people were prepared for Mystic Mine. And if this deck doesn't stick the Mystic Mine on the field for a couple rounds, it will not be able to keep up with the best decks, because Mystic Mine, what does for this deck is that it creates this simplified game state the Sky Striker basically thrives in and cannot lose to anything when it gets to this point. But without Mystic Mine, it's pretty much impossible these days to get to this point with only one engage. So this is why people have outs to Mystic Mine. Then this deck is not that great, but it's still worthy of the 9 slot, because if you are not prepared for this deck, then you can outright lose, especially games 1 to it. So yeah, it's still a threatening deck, not as much as when it was in the beginning of the format. Number 8, Eldritch. Now, Eldritch was better before, but the thing is, it falls to the same category as the Mystic Mine Sky Striker strategy, mainly because people main deck outs for Mystic Mine, and then Eldritch becomes collateral damage for this, because Eldritch relies on back row, so if people are maining Feather Dusters and Twin Twisters, or even some people are maining Red Reboot for cards like Deep Barrier, then yes, Eldritch is going to fall victim to these kinds of things, even though they are not meant for Eldritch specifically. But still, Eldritch again does have the floodgates to win. It can incorporate the Branded engine, which gave it a little bit of a boost compared to the pure deck that we were used to seeing before, but still it's not the most consistent thing to play, because you are relying a lot on your opponent having to play a certain deck that your floodgates can deal with, so you have to basically prepare for more of the meta decks, but then you're going to lose to Rogue and vice versa, so it's not very easy to make this deck work. The only universal floodgate that you can run is Skill Drain, which, unless you run into a mirror match, then 99% of the time it's going to be good. So this is why this deck, it still needs a little bit more of a push for the meta, and if people stop playing backer removal in the main deck, because backer removal is not just for Mystic Mine, cards like Twin Twisters are really good against Despia as well, and then if these conditions are met maybe for next format, that's when Eldritch can thrive a little bit better, but for now, putting it at number 8 is good enough. Number 7, Salamangreat. Now, Salamangreat has a new iteration, this format, and this is why I'm putting it higher than all the other decks in the list so far, because Salamangreat as a pure deck, it was not the best thing ever, but now there is a version where people are playing it more of like a hybrid deck with code tokers, and they're using cards like Microcoder and all those other cards in order to be able to extend and not just rely on a normal summon. And the thing is, this deck is one of the decks that can make Baguska the easiest, and Baguska is a card that in this format can outright win you a lot of matchups on its own. So this is why this deck can make Baguska, it can back it up with a counter trap, and it can also make Heat Soul, which is a card that gives you constant advantage, and then you can dig into hand traps to be able to stop your opponent. This deck is very consistent as well, so I feel like this deck moving forward, if a lot more people start playing it, then it could move up a couple slots in this list, because it's a very budget deck. The only exception is access code in the deck, so if you can afford that, and the rest of the deck is basically free. So if you have the deck, then you can give it a try, and I'm sure that once more people realize how good this deck has become with all those different versions of it, then we're going to see more of it moving forward. Number 6, Drytron. Now, this is a surprise, I feel like, to a lot of people, that Drytron can still manage to do so well, because it was kind of hid in the ban list with the banning of Auroradon, because there was a play where people were using Beatrice to send a floodgate to the grave, and then Auroradon's third effect added that floodgate back. But I guess the second Benten was enough to push the deck to be at least viable, because this deck has lost a lot of win conditions. Without Eva, the addition of Herald of Ultimateness or Herald of Perfection is not really viable anymore because you don't have that many fairies to discard. Without Auroradon, the Beatrice play is also dead, but the Megalith package keeps this deck alive because you can do so many different stuff. And the cool thing about the Megalith package is that it's a package that a lot of people don't really know what to do against, because it's something that you don't see too often. So when you combine the consistency of the Drytron deck with the power of the Megalith, along with some really good things that Drytron has on its own, like being able to go into rank 1 plays and going to Zeus, it gives the deck enough strength to be able to survive in the meta. And with the third Ben 10 coming in the next list, most probably, this deck can only become even stronger from now on. Number 5, Dragon Link. Dragon Link, it will never die. Even the addition of Alba Lenatus in the format, it just did not matter for any Dragon Link players. You would think that an addition of a card that can basically contact fuse with any monster in your deck can basically be enough for people to stop playing the deck, but that was not the case. At the beginning, people were not really playing Alba Lenatus, but I feel like now that we've seen that this deck is actually very, very represented in the format, then maybe people playing Branded Despia will start playing Alba Lenatus in the extra deck again, and this deck does have a lot. And the inclusion of Borderland Dragon made the deck even stronger than it was before, giving you a really powerful boss monster, and it can do basically all the stuff that it could do before. With cards like Chaos Ruler and Zombie Vampire, you can do a lot of excavations and milling to set up your graveyard. You have Heavenly Spheres, which is still a really good interruption and follow-up card, and being able to go into Omni Negates like Savage and Abyss means that you have ways to deal with pretty much anything in the format. So yeah, Dragon Link is still a really good deck. I thought that the inclusion of the Brave package would be something to see in the deck, but probably people just feel like that playing for more of a combo deck, of a pure deck, is more important, because the Adventure package is cool, but it doesn't explode your entire hand onto the field, and you are forced to play normal summons that are good only like under the restriction of Rite of Aramesir, like Black Metal Dragon, but Seyfert is such a powerhouse that people just prefer playing that over the Adventure package. So this is the number 5 spot belongs to pure Dragon Link and not Adventure Dragon. Number 4, Flanders. Now another deck that's very similar to Eldritch, but I feel like Flanders is the better Eldritch of the format. It's basically the stun deck of the format, but the thing is, it's very difficult to describe exactly what this deck is, because yes, while it relies a lot on Barrier Statue in order to basically defeat your opponent, you have a lot of other cards that can be described as a mid-range deck, because you have Ryza in order to be able to bounce stuff, you have Avian for Omni Negates, Empen is also a floodgate. So yeah, this deck, it does have a lot going for it, and being able to main deck D-Shifter is one of the most notorious things that makes this deck so powerful, because such a powerhouse of a hand trap, if a deck can main deck it and the deck is already good on its own, then you know it's going to be for a great deck. So this is why Flanders belongs to the number 4th slot on the list. Number 3, Sword Soul. Now, Sword Soul, I felt like was going to be a little bit better, but there was an addition of a new deck, a very recent deck in the format that actually outperformed Sword Soul by a lot, and the reason is because Sword Soul is a deck that falls to the collateral damage of D-Barrier. People started playing D-Barrier a lot ever since Despia became the best deck, and that's why Sword Soul actually took kind of a back seat, because it loses to D-Barrier as well, while the second deck in this list does not completely lose to D-Barrier. But Sword Soul still, aside from D-Barrier, it's a deck that does what it wants to do every single game consistently. It's not the most explosive deck, but the thing is, when you combine a card like Chiza with a Baron or a Sinister Longyang and 1 or 2 hand drops in the hand, that's basically enough to win against any matchup. We are not in a format where you need like 5 Omni Negates in order to be able to stop your opponent. The format is more slowed down, more of a grindy format. You do see a lot of grind games that are not decided in the first 2 turns of the game, because people do not really play Artifact Scythe anymore. Only decks like Libromancer and other cheesy strategies try to use Artifact Scythe. So this is why Sword Soul can actually outperform a lot of decks, because the tennies give you insane grind game. The deck is very consistent, is able to do exactly what it wants every single game. It hardly ever breaks, and if it breaks, it means that it has at least 3 hand traps in the hand in order to be able to stop your opponent, so it's not completely a brick. So this is why Sword Soul is at number 3 in the list. Number 2, Pank Therion. Now, Pank Therion is much better than a lot of people expected it to be in the beginning of the format. It took down the German Nationals, the biggest national that we've had this year and pretty much every year. So Pank Therion is one of those decks that, first of all, it does not completely lose to D-Barrier. Even though it's a synchro deck, it does have the Pank engine on top of the Therion engine. So if you get D-Barrier and you can't really use your synchros, then your Therion engine is basically going to carry you, because Regulus is an absurd card. Being able to recycle it with Discolosseum, get a lot of searches with Lily Borea, this deck does not really need an extra deck in order to do something, which is a good thing about the format, because D-Barrier has never been as strong than it is now. Only when it first came out back in Zoo format, where people were like main decking it every time, but it took a backseat with Link format, but now it's back in the metagame again. again. So this is why people have chosen to play this deck. It's the most combo-oriented deck, I would say, of the format, because with maybe just one teleport, you can do a lot of stuff, and King Calamity is no joke. It's basically an Azathoth for any card effect, not just monster effects. So if you get locked by that, then you're basically guaranteed to get OTK during the next turn. So this is one of those few decks of the format that can basically lock your entire turn and then OTK you. So it's the most combo-oriented deck of the format. It does not completely lose to D-Barrier. It's very, very consistent, because all you need is like one teleport on one Xiamin in order to do the full Pank combo, and then you have the Therions to back them up, and being able to go for other cards like a Therion Trap card that gets you one from the grave and then equip another one means that you also get more interruptions and more searches, and this is why this deck is so good and very, very deserving of the number 2 slot on the list. And at number 1, nobody expected something else, I think. We have Branded Despia. Yes, D-Barrier is a thing, but Branded Despia is the deck that you're going to be seeing the most until we reach the following format, which is going to change things completely. But the new set is not going to be out for the WCQ season. We are not going to have a ban list until the WCQ season, so you can expect Branded Despia to be the most dominant deck and the most represented deck, just because of how much the deck can do with a single copy of Branded Fusion. And you have so many ways to search the card. Being able to main deck a lot of one-offs that are part of the engine that are all searchable, cards like Kit, like Branded Lost, it gives the deck so many unfair points, especially Branded Lost. It feels like a meltdown on steroids that gives you searches as well. So this is why this deck, it can do so much, and people have played so many different builds. You can play a very hand trap based build in order to be able to play around D-Barrier and have something to back up it with. People play with Allure of Darkness in order to search more cards. Yes, the deck does have so many different versions you can play, and this is why this deck, being able to outgrind pretty much any deck of the format with all of its recovery, all of its broken effects like Mirror Jade, and this is why it's the best deck of the format and number 1 slot on the list. So yep, that's the list, guys. I think that the format is pretty defined by now. I don't feel like we are going to expect a lot of surprises moving into the WCQ season, but you never know. Yu-Gi-Oh players always tend to surprise, especially when it comes to the big leagues. You always see at least one thing that is out of the ordinary when it comes to such big events. So we're welcome for all those surprises, and we can see exactly what is going to take down those big events. And moving forward to the next format, then things are going to change completely, but we'll update when that time comes. So yep, that's the video, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.